Hello and welcome to Solidarity, the Resource Center's podcast at UC Santa Cruz. The purpose of Solidarity is to uplift the voices and actions of students who work at the resource centers or with student organizations on campus. I'm MK, I use they, them pronouns, and I'm an intern with the ERC, or the Ethnic Resource Centers, who will be hosting today's episode. Mel is here as well. They are in the background doing the much needed tech support and are also an intern at the ERC. Please note that the opinions and views expressed in the episodes are of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the UC Santa Cruz Resource Centers. With that introduction being said, today's episode, the third episode, is on BIPOC environmentalism, or Black, Indigenous, People of Color environmentalism. I'm really excited. I think we have an amazing group of guest speakers today, and we'll have a really great conversation with Chris, Paradise, and Jessica. So let me go ahead and let them introduce themselves. I don't know if anyone wants to go first, but feel free.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel very honored to be in this space with y'all. But yeah, my name is Jessica. My pronouns are she, her, hers. So a little bit about like some of the work that I've done on campus is I worked at the sustainability office for 2 years. I started out on the zero waste team, and then my second year I was the student sustainability advisor lead. I sort of like have moved to the world of social media right now, and I am like the social media specialist of Kayla Kumar, who is running for Santa Cruz City Council. And I also started an Instagram called where I talk about all things social justice with a lens of environmentalism. But yeah, also I'm a Pisces, and I think that's really important to know about me. So thank you.
Jessica, thank you so much. Paradise, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Paradise. I use she, her pronouns. Yeah, I'm a student at UC Santa Cruz. I'm a community studies and a politics, and I'm working on a CRES major. And I also volunteer / work at the African American Resource Culture Center, and I'm a part of BSU and East Squared Engaging Education on campus. Yeah, I'm also excited to be here and to just be in conversation with you all. And yeah.
Yay, this is so exciting. I'll really quickly just introduce myself too. I'm Christopher Lang. I'm a incoming 4th year grad student in environmental studies. And so, you know, as far as on-campus work, the last year and then starting again this year, I've been a graduate student intern for the American Indian Resource Center, which is one of the ethnic resource centers on campus. And a lot of my own research is looking at how do we reframe sustainability through Black and Indigenous lenses. And so it's been really useful for me to be in that space. And then I kind of dabble into other groups, including People of Color Sustainability Collective, and just general like zero waste and vegan communities on campus. And yeah, really excited to be here.
Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. Let's go ahead and dive into more of the discussion of the podcast. So the topic of today's episode is going to be BIPOC environmentalism, or Black, Indigenous, and People of Color environmentalism. And I think for when we were thinking of the topic of like, why did we choose this? It's really talking about, well, personally, I am a graduate of environmental studies. So this has like that impact to me personally, but I think even, you know, like in today's world where we are facing climate change, and especially with this pandemic, like we're thinking about how we are more and more interacting with our environment. And not only that, but recognizing the social aspects that impact our relationship with the environment. For example, with COVID, we know that the majority of those who are being infected and impacted, really, the communities are Black and brown and working class communities, right? And so I think when it comes to climate change, when it comes to COVID, we're thinking more about how we interact with the environment around us, and how do we do that critically as well. So I think really, like, in this moment of COVID, of the worsening climate crisis, and also like the worsening economic situation of capitalism, this really calls for us to look at how we interact with the environment in a critical way. I know that folks actually brought up this graphic, this image, and folks actually wanted to talk about this first, with this topic of interconnectedness, right? And so I would just want to invite y'all to reflect upon this graphic. Why did you specifically choose this, and why did you want to start off the podcast with talking about these different things?
I can take a stab at that. So this Venn diagram here, and big shout out to Paradise for posting it on Facebook, and then we saw it and it was like, this is it, right? It really just kind of talks about an integrated approach to, these systems of oppression. At the sort of core of it is this violence, right? This is violence through patriarchy, through racism, through capitalism, settler colonialism, and environmental terrorism. And I would even add with environmental terrorism, sort of speciesism, where humans are kind of, buttressed over all other species. That's in the name of, under capitalism, humans have obviously dominated, right? And so what I love about this Venn diagram is it really talks about how these are overlapping and interconnected. And I think a lot of times in mainstream environmental discourse, we really try to look at isolating and trying to uncouple these issues when they've been sort of woven together from, the origins of this country particularly. We're thinking about, how do you talk about, conservation without also talking about the ways in which Indigenous people were massacred and also removed from the land in order to set up our national park system, right? So that's one example of how you can't really think about Yosemite National Park without also talking about settler colonialism and, all of the bodies that were kind of considered other in order to kind of produce, this particular type of body who could benefit from it. So, for me, these are, this is a cultural, a spiritual, a fully integrated approach to trying to tackle this question of how are we going to work in this next era to, help our environment, right? And it's also a social issue.
I'll add on that. When I saw this image, I thought it was like the perfect example of how we can't talk about environmental justice, we can't talk about sustainability without talking about capitalism, without talking about racism and patriarchy and colonization. I think people often think that when we talk about veganism, it has like nothing to do with people and nothing to do with the workers, nothing to do with the way that the food is produced, and that it only has to do with animals. And like one of my recent posts on Blanca Whisperer was actually the intersection of racial justice and veganism. And like I got like a comment saying, oh, this isn't veganism. Like I wouldn't consider that veganism, like maybe like agriculturism or something, whatever like the person said. But I was like, veganism is for all species. Like if we're talking about veganism, we have to also talk about the way that capitalism and consumerism and colonization has impacted people because of the way that we eat, because of the food system. So seeing this image was like a perfect way to just be like, white supremacy is embedded in like environmentalism, especially modern day environmentalism. And if we don't dismantle this and talk about it, then all we're doing is reproducing it.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of y'all. And yeah, I think for me, yeah, like kind of already like doing the work of like zero waste, and like sustainability practices, but I guess not knowing it at the time when I was like in middle school and high school and just like growing up. And like going to college, I would like see or just like go into spaces where it was like sustainability or like zero waste, and it kind of like didn't bring up the fact that like, oh, capitalism exists or like racism is gonna exist, and kind of just like understanding that no, these are like all connected, and we kind of have to understand, acknowledge this violence that is embedded in our society, and kind of point it out to see how can we like make it better, or just like kind of alleviate the pain and like the violence. It's like something important, and so that's what I saw when I saw this, and understanding that it's all connected and it's all overlap. And sometimes it can get kind of lost, or like someone made that comment like, oh, I don't see that, because it's like so layered and things like that, and they're like kind of like have this like glaze of like, oh no, it can't be that. So yeah, I'm happy that someone posted this, so shout out to I think Social Club for making this graphic, and just like understanding and like bringing attention to like toxic masculinity, white supremacy, misogyny, and like also we're individuals in like society, so have impact in our communities, and we are all capable of violence and harm, and how can we try to create less harm within our doing and our impact on the environment and in the world is important. And so yeah, that's all I want to share right now. Yeah, I could talk about this.
Yeah, no, I think like all of y'all brought up really great points, and I even think to this graphic is like it's even non-exhaustive, right? Like I think like it only then begins to introduce like the ways that things are interconnected, and y'all are already transitioning to sort of like specific examples, right? So before we talk about what your specific examples or relationships to the graphic, to this concept of BIPOC environmentalism, I guess I just wanted to maybe even retract a little bit, right? And really sort of clear things out, like what is BIPOC environmentalism, or what does it really mean to focus on those aspects when you are talking about the environment. Y'all have mentioned beforehand that, you know, to not recognize that is to perpetuate white supremacy. The white supremacy, how environmentalism has been manipulated to justify those kinds of things, whether that be erasing the history of slave labor building this country, or erasing the history of indigenous genocide in creating the landscape. So I just really want to sort of, for folks who have never encountered this term, or if this is new to them, like how would you then sort of explain, like what does it mean to center, or what does it mean to focus on BIPOC when talking about environmentalism?
I guess I can start. I have, so I think centering BIPOC when talking about sustainability and environmentalism starts with understanding that BIPOC practices are the foundation of environmentalism, and a lot of the mainstream media's portrayal of sustainability erases that. So when looking at things like tongue scrapers that are like metal and are super big, like in the zero waste like consumer media, like noticing that like those are actually things that have existed for a while, but are just capitalized on and given back to BIPOC for them to buy. And it's questioning and researching how the mainstream media has completely erased the history of BIPOC within environmentalism. So it really starts with researching and knowing the intersections and the ways that BIPOC have been in this movement and have started this movement. But I can continue. I feel like I want to give other people time to talk.
Paradise, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Jessica. I'm trying to think of examples, but I'm just like blinking, but I'm just remembering like a Twitter thread, I guess, when people were like, oh, you should like buy this, or like this is like the correct way to be sustainable, and people are like, no, like I've been doing this for years, and like my family has been like doing these like practices or just like traditions. I guess like one that's like really familiar to me, which is I guess like people go thrifting, but in my family we don't go thrifting. I guess like we like just pass down clothes. So like I have like my mom's clothes from the 90s, the 80s. I have like my auntie's clothes and things like that. And we just like kind of like recycle that way. But we also like, we're not like 100% or zero waste. So like sometimes we go shopping, but like there's like a new trend of like going thrifting and like reselling your clothes and like Depop or like all these other places. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like that's not really, I guess you're like kind of shying away from like fast fashion and things like that, but you're also trying to capitalize and like resell it, which is like not really good. Yeah, I'm just like thinking of like in LA, just like different ways of like toxic waste being dumped in like communities like Compton and East LA, and also thinking about places where in like the United States where they don't have access to clean water, and also like during COVID, it's like people don't have access to testing, or it's really at a disadvantage, and we're supposed to be caring for these people in these communities, but we're not really showing up for them. So I'm just like constantly thinking about like that and like how can I show up for the community. So I've been like volunteering during COVID with COVID MD, and they've been doing a lot of testing in LA, Oakland, and I think Atlanta. They've been doing testing, kind of like weekly testing for free, and you get like your results back in like 24 hours. But it's like, it's really nice because they do like pop-up locations throughout the week, which is really nice to like get all the cities. But it's like, oh my gosh, like people have to like pay. In the beginning of the COVID, it was like $300 for testing and things like that. So it's like really harmful for our communities and when we're essential workers and things like that. Yeah, that's what I'll say right now. But Chris,
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Perry. I love how you brought it into COVID and the workplace, because I think that's what, BIPOC environmentalism is really, it's a framework, it's a change of a lens. It's a lens that analyzes, the home space, it analyzes the workplace, it analyzes the sort of the relationships between, and sort of where the environmental goods are, where the environmental bads are. And I wouldn't say it necessarily always has to be from BIPOC folks. I think anyone, you can take a framework and, write anti-racist, anti-capitalist sort of, critiques of slave labor, critiques of indigenous genocide, into that and try to use it to dismantle wherever one's position is. So I think it's really an important framework to kind of think about the history of, the commodity in general, like Jessica was saying around the tongue scraper, right? These are things that, ironically, the people who were closest to natural, the people who were closest to savage, slave, barbaric, in the origins of this country, are somehow left out of the conversation of environment and what does it mean to take care of the environment. And I think that is a byproduct of sort of amnesia and of white supremacy and the sort of racial wealth gap that perpetuated because of, this unrepaired, without reparations for, slavery, for genocide. So I think, BIPOC environmentalism gets at the ways the humans, the human nature divide, the ways the land itself has literally become a commodity to extract value, and anything on that land can be that as well, right? But it also expands this definition, this very rigid definition of the environment that we've been conditioned to think the environment is something outside of ourselves, because as humans in nature, we are nature, but B, as something that only can be accessed through driving to a national park, which we know, Carolyn Finney has that book, Black Faces, White Spaces, which talks about this racialized outdoors, and how, it's very rare to see folks of color be able to get into these spaces, because they're difficult to travel to. There's not much representation. But if you look at even Outdoor Magazine, the covers of those magazines are almost always going to be white. Maybe now it's changed because of sort of this post-racial trendiness. So I think, BIPOC environmentalism is this really, is trying to be a robust framework to try to unsettle and unmake all of these relationships, based off exploitation. Land to human to animal to plant, all of it.
I just wanted to go back to what Paradise said really quickly on thrifting and Depop and all of that, because the idea of selling clothes that was used was something that people of color did through flea markets and through swap meets. That was common, to go through a just pile of clothes and to see what fits, what doesn't, what your siblings can wear, all of that. Even if we were to buy clothes, it would be things that were 2 sizes bigger, so we can grow into it. So there can be a long-lasting lifetime of clothing that stays in the family, that gets passed down. It's thought about strategically with clothing and passing down through, I guess, siblings and generations. So thanks for bringing that up. I loved that, because it's been capitalized upon and then given back to us, and I don't know how I feel about that.
I think all of y'all are bringing up really good points. I also wanted to acknowledge, Chris, what you said, that this is a perspective, this is a lens, and to really highlight, yes, oftentimes when talking about environmentalism, sure, we talk about exploitation, but exploitation on whose behalf? Not only of the land, but of the people that are then impacted, or the animals, or the species that are then impacted. Whether that be exploitation or commodification, who's being commodified, to what market is that being sold to, where did that come from, etc. So I think y'all are hitting both sort of the general idea and the particulars, right, of what that then looks like. I know that folks come from a lot of really different sort of backgrounds in their relationship to this, and I really wanted to highlight those things when we were coming up with the script for this episode, right? Folks come more from I come from the perspective of doula work and reproductive justice, or others were saying I come from the perspective of food apartheid or food deserts, and then others were talking about what is the commodification of sustainable lifestyles. So I really wanted to invite y'all to talk about maybe what are more of your particular interests, right? To really highlight how this framework of looking at the environment is so much larger than just plants, than trees, than ecosystems.
I can take a stab. Yeah, I think it's, I think, I've been blessed. I was able to, I traveled a little bit, and I was able to see sort of how these systems were just kind of, global, but also local and very racialized, and just kind of witnessing those, you know, when I used to live in the Bahamas, and I worked at a shark research station, an environmental, you know, research station, but I was like the only Black person working there, pretty much the only person of color, until there was a few interns who had been brought in from the Bahamas, which was really cool. But, you know, you're seeing this like super Black country, but then there's no representation in terms of the environmental, you know, these access to these, you know, environmental ecological stewardship practices from the institution of like a biological research station, right? Obviously people were already practicing those, in their own ways, but I feel like there was a very big disconnect, in my opinion, from like sort of community building and community outreach. There was times, I'm not gonna say it didn't exist, but I felt like there was some disconnections. And there was also a lot of waste through sort of the legacy of colonization and this sort of racial relationship to extraction and movement. So for during like 4th of July or any like big weekend, you'd have all these massive big boats coming across the Gulf Stream and fishing all of the seafood and dumping all of the stuff that they bought at Costco in the US, and there'd be all this trash on the island, and it would have to get burnt. And so I'd smell all that burnt plastic and I'd be like, God, this is infuriating. And the cycle just kept continuing. And meanwhile, you know, it was an extractive relationship, right, through tourism. And then I moved to New Orleans with my partner, who's from there, from Baton Rouge and from Mississippi. And I learned all about sort of these, you know, Cancer Alley and the refineries that were making all this plastic, right? And so we saw from production to consumption to deposition that, you know, Black and brown and low income working class folks were being literally, you know, polluted in all of those processes. And so that was where I just started, and even in our food system too, right? And that's where I just started to realize, like, dude, zero waste is not just an aesthetic of, you know, being cutesy, but actually like life or death, right? And, you know, I have conversations with folks who, you know, mom passed from cancer, from living on top of a landfill that they didn't even know was being, you know, was a landfill because it was sold from them. And so there's just, you know, it's harrowing. And so I think, how do individually, and I love how Paradise brought that in, you know, there's these structures, but also how do we individually become agents of change, and kind of help create a collective space where these zero waste, you know, societies can exist so that no one can be disposed of.
I love that. I love the idea of zero waste not being an aesthetic, like not taking photos of like your cute little jar of trash that you've collected in like a year or something. Like, it is not about that. Like, it does, first of all, that doesn't even like capture the byproducts of like what you've been buying. Like, but that's another conversation. That could be a whole different topic. But anyway, with like reproductive justice in particular, I've been looking at environmentalism through that lens because of my field study right now. With community studies, I'm working with Kindred Space LA, and it's a doula and midwife organization that serves expecting mothers and families in the LA area. And when I was going through the doula training, it got a bit like emotional, seeing the way that already navigating the modern hospital is so difficult for pregnant people, with the barriers of like not being listened to, not being heard, and then adding race on top of that, adding sexism on top of that, and then finally adding like environmental catastrophes on top of that. So then there's higher rates of infertility, there's higher rates of like premature labor, there's higher rates of birth defects. And so adding environmentalism on top of like pregnancy was so difficult to see and to witness and to like understand that it's already difficult for people that are pregnant, and then adding all these horrible environmental effects on it is really sad to see, because it felt like nothing was happening. But there are so many organizations that are working towards like specifically serving BIPOC to navigate the modern day hospitals, if they do want to like deliver there, but also promoting like a home birth, which is really cool, but also can be inaccessible if you live in a space where like water is not clean, where like the means of getting all the supplies because of COVID, like getting medical supplies right now is really difficult. So having home births is more difficult. And yeah, reproductive justice and environmental justice totally intersect. And I've been seeing that lens more and more lately with my work. But quality of food also makes a huge difference when you're pregnant, when you deliver, like the food that you consume is going directly towards the baby if you're breastfeeding, and not consuming like good quality food, not consuming nutritious meals can have negative effects. Consuming food that's really high in like pesticides that have all of these like horrible effects on your body alone. Imagine having to pass that down to your next generation and not being able to do anything about it because that's the only food that you have. And I feel like now I don't even remember the question, but that's, I guess, what I would say with those two lenses.
Yeah, to just like reiterate, right, it is talking about what is your specific relationship with BIPOC environmentalism, what sort of brought you to this understanding, what are your personal experience with it as well. So that was sort of and I think you did a great job with that anyway. So
okay, yeah,
don't worry about it.
okay.
But yeah, it's definitely easy to ramble. So I feel that. I didn't know, Paradise, if you also wanted to like share with your perspective. I know that at the end of Jessica, when you were talking about food, and then I was like, ooh, that's a great transition. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for talking about that, Jessica. I'm finishing up day 5. I'm doing a reproductive justice summer submit with Sister Song. And I was like, oh my gosh, when I found out about them during like my first year, I was taking a class with Adrian Steiner from community studies. And during that, like I did my essay on like birthing justice. It was like just like focused on like Black mothers and like why the mortality rate is so crazy. And basically like yesterday, they were just like talking about like organizing for reproductive justice in the South and how difficult it is. And then also like during COVID, they are not like hospitals aren't allowing doulas to be in the space and things like that. But through technology, some doulas are like able to like zoom in and things like that. But also like C-sections have gone up a rise since COVID because they're not like having, I guess, this adequate support to do their birthing and like their plan or just like what it is supposed to be for them. And so yeah, but yeah, I guess adding on to that, I recently watched a film called Okja on Netflix. I'm not sure if y'all have seen that. Yeah, so my partner and I were watching that and I was like, this is like so heartbreaking, but like also so real. Because I've been vegan for like a year now, basically like a year. And when like I first like before I was thinking about it, I had a conversation with a friend and they were at this pop-up event and they were just like telling me about like why they turned vegan or just like why they wanted to like reduce their meat consumption because they're not vegan, but they also like eat meat for I guess like during like their practices like they have with their engage with like family. And they were just like bringing it back home to like, oh, like just like imagine like this cow or like this animal as like a mother and they're being ripped away from their child and like they're being like forced to conceive and things like that. They're like, well, you know, like no one wants to like live in that life and things like that. So like we should be mindful of like animals because they are beings and like they are, it was just like a reflective scenario and just like conversation. And I always think about that, like when I see like meat and things like that. And that's what that movie like brought up to me, because I was like, oh my gosh, it's not like a real documentary. It's like it's like a superfood pig. But it's like it has like the real effect, and it's very true. But I'll talk about my journey about like living in South Central Los Angeles and like growing up in a food apartheid. But I just wanted to share that with y'all. Yeah, so I guess like maybe in like middle school, I noticed that I like lived in a food apartheid, because we would like drive. I guess like what it's called is like living. It was like first coined as like living in a food desert. I guess meaning like you'd have no access to like food, and like maybe 2 to like 1 miles or like 5-mile radius. And so in middle school, I started, I guess, to like question like why that is. Like why don't we have any grocery stores, but we have like so many like liquor stores and like things like that like aren't really places that I could go to like get fresh food and groceries and things like that. So I guess like in high school, I started this page that I just like rediscovered, was like my Instagram page. It's called like Paradise Kitchen. I was just like looking through like posts that I made like in the beginning of high school about like, oh, like being in a food desert, things like that. And so we should have access to like healthy food and things like that. And during my time in high school, I lived like not too far from a YMCA, and so we started growing food at like a community garden, or just like a regular space. And then we started like we opened a cafe on like the second floor of our YMCA for people who worked out to like get food, but also to like have access to juicing and things like that. And so that was really impactful for me to like see that change from like starting up a community garden, but then also like having access to like a cafe that aren't any nearby in the community. And then I guess, yeah, just like learning about like food sovereignty and like really fighting for access and control of like what we get to eat and like how it's grown and things like that is like really important. And like also setting standards, I guess, for me, even like how I'm consuming my food or how I'm purchasing my food, because there are food workers that are growing these crops and things like that. Like, are they getting adequate pay and things like that? It's like super important for me. And yeah, I'll just leave it there. And then yeah, I'm not sure if I answered the question, but that was like my little food journey, I guess. Now I'm growing my own food because it's easy to grow food scraps. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to be sustainable during this time, but I also like go out to like get food too. But yeah.
Again, I am here to reassure you that you did answer the question and you're doing a great
Okay.
job. I know that we have a little bit of time left, and I definitely wanted to give folks the ability to, well, first of all, let me just like sum up some of the experiences that y'all were talking about with doula work and with living in a food desert, being in quote unquote sustainable spaces, but not really relating to the communities that those in. So yeah, no, thank you so much for like sharing your personal experiences. And like, I think another thing that y'all even mentioned was like, it takes a different weight, right? Like, right, you're saying like, I literally smelled burning garbage in a community, or like Jessica, you're talking about life or death, right? And for our families and for our communities, environmentalism isn't just trendy. It's not something that's out in the future, like we think climate change is now. It's our environment. It's how we interact with each other, and it's how we're able to like live and grow in life. And I just really want to emphasize that, right? Because when we talked about in the beginning with this graphic talking about violence, right, I think that really puts a particular weight, right? Like we all have really different stakes in participating and caring about the environment, and advocating for those things. And those are based off of things like race, like gender, like class background, like sexuality, etc. So I wanted to have sort of like a nice like close off question and ability for folks to sort of talk about. I know like a lot of y'all have mentioned like it's been like low-key like your life experience that has brought you here today, and everybody is introduced to things at different times. And I was wondering if you were to give advice, or if you were to like give a message to the community or even individuals who are sort of nervous about entering into environmental issues, nervous to speak up, nervous to bring that analysis of BIPOC to their environmental work, especially given COVID, especially given climate change. Like, what would you really tell them to embolden them in this moment? Because I think like it's more than often when we talk about the environment, when we talk about capitalism, there tends to be this like sadness, or this feeling of like we can't do anything about this. And so I know I'm even today joined by like 3 really powerful people. And I would just love for y'all to talk about like, yeah, what is your message of encouragement? Why does this work need to continue? And how do you keep your head up in a really difficult moment?
I guess I can start. I guess like the first thing that came to my mind was like a concept that I'm like still learning. It's called like eco-deaf. So just like I might be saying it wrong, but just like acknowledging that like I guess like the life cycle is ending of like the environment and things like that, and kind of honoring that like emotions are real for like the climate crisis that we're in, and like we're living in COVID right now. And so like kind of just like honoring our emotions and feelings for that. But also I guess this was like pushing forward. I kind of just want to say like, yeah, like we're already, like you might already be doing the work and might not know. So I just like encourage you to like keep doing what you're doing. And there's like a bunch of like organization or like social media accounts that we can like shout out that are like also might be doing the work that you're already possibly doing. And yeah, I guess like, yeah, like you are enough. Like you deserve to have autonomy over like your body and like the environment that you live in and things like that. And even if it seems like an impossible fight, like we got you, or like you got yourself. And like, yeah, you're gonna be in community with others. And yeah, I think community has like really held me down, held me together. So yeah, just like finding your community and like having these conversations that we're having now, and like exchanging practices or just like things, seeds, or just like things like that. It's like very important. And yeah, that's what I wanted to share.
I love what you just said, Paradise. I really, every single person here has a role to play and a responsibility, I think. I think that Venn diagram in the beginning, really talking about the interconnectedness of all of these systems, but also the interconnectedness of all life, right? Nothing exists in isolation. And so I think that's, wherever we are at, whatever we can provide, and that might be different across different spaces, right? It's not about purity and it's not about being perfect, but it's really about, I think it's about kind of leaning into some of the discomfort, leaning into some of the, different readings and different spiritual practices that can kind of help us re-immerse a relationship to land and to, healing, social inequality through gender, through race, through class. And I think, being able to think through a different framework and let that framework kind of take us and, go on different journeys and understand how important it is for reparations and for, Indigenous land sovereignty. Those are so critical for this, because we need the equality of representation and the equality of access to be able to transform our paradigm. So wherever anyone is at, I think we're all still, whole in this earth. and I think, ultimately, like, yes, very fatalistically, our survival depends on us overcoming it, but, being able to lean into that optimism and lean into that discomfort to try to find where, where we can, find ourselves, in our space. Not everybody has to take up the same space, and that's great. In our unique way, we can find, the way to contribute. And so, that's what I would offer to this is, trying to make it about healing, but also being very critical. I'm here in a suburb, very much buffered and cushy from, a lot of the impacts of environmental injustice. So how am I going to be accountable to that? Just thinking about your own space, your own position, your own relationship to this, because we're all related to it, right? And trying to work from that grand point.
Yeah, I love what both of you just said, because it can be sad, like seeing and reading all of these things that are happening, like whether it's environmental racism or just anything environmentalism. But it's really sad to like constantly see. And I love what Paradise said with like, fill your Instagram feed with like folks that center BIPOC in environmentalism. I think I follow like 2 white people, and already like I know I follow 2 white people like on my Blanta Whisper Instagram, and like some of their posts like make me like unsettled, like make me uneasy, and like I feel like that I need to intentionally follow people that will fill me with like the right amount of posts that are informative and a bit sad, but like really good to know. But also there's other posts that are things are getting done. Work is being done, and it's a matter of just like getting involved in that work, because there's things that are already happening. So go to those like Zoom online seminars that are happening right now. Go to those workshops that are happening right now. Like most of them are free, even if they do cost. Like usually the costs go to like the person directly like giving you the information, like pay people for their like time. But yeah, exist in the spaces and be intentional with the media you're consuming, because it can really be negative or it can really be positive. And I've already even had to like comment on those 2 people that I follow on their posts and like DM them, and like, but I acknowledge that like I really can only follow those like 2 people, because like the time and energy that the free time and energy that I'm putting into like educating them or like trying to help them like is draining. So be aware of like the amount of emotional labor that you're also exuding, and be aware of the like, I guess like traumatic like posts on your feed that you're consuming. And also I just wanted to say that, that existence is resistance. So just existing in these spaces, being a voice in the conversation is a form of resistance. And like, there's no like set rule of like, oh, like I can only be like a environmental activist if I do like X, Y, and Z. Like that doesn't exist. There's not really a set of rules. It's just existing in these spaces, doing what you can. What's your capacity? Like, how much time can you put towards this? And like, because I'm sure you're already doing so much that you don't even know about. But yeah, I think I would leave it off of there, that just be conscious of like how much you're consuming and how much you're like giving off to people. And yeah, I mean, the spaces can vary too. Like I got really uncomfortable being in white spaces that white environmental spaces that were reading land acknowledgements like a script, because I didn't even like realize that until I was in spaces where there was such a spiritual connection when they read, they didn't even read like a script. They just like freely expressed like the land acknowledgement, like with such a spiritual aspect. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like all of these white spaces I've been in have seriously read it like it's mandatory in order to continue, where yes, it is mandatory, but like the way that you're expressing it can be a hit or miss for me, whether I'll like take the event seriously or not. Honestly, it makes a difference. So, I mean, see what works for you and see what doesn't work for you. Those were just some examples, but yeah.
Yes, for sure. So thank you so much for adding, like, I think all of y'all have spoke really well on, like, it is a tough time, and it is good to, I think it is, at the end of the day, I think it is good to acknowledge that this is a struggle. It's good to acknowledge what the stakes are, and it's good to acknowledge that this results in violence, but then that just means all the more like the importance of resisting against that and building a new future. And like, we do have mass media that will never cover these things, that will never cover the work of like doulas or the work of community gardens. And so it's also up to us to change the culture around that. And so I do really invite people who are interested to feed your curiosity, learn more, be a part of a community and a collective where you can hold yourself accountable to these things, besides just saying that you do it on an individual basis. So yeah, I really appreciate all of y'all for coming here today and to talk about your personal experiences with BIPOC environmentalism, your thoughts around it. That sort of is the wrapping up of the episode number 3. But yes, thank you so much. Thank you, our guests. Thank you, our tech crew. Appreciate everybody being here and getting to meet together for this episode 3 on BIPOC environmentalism.